You call the roll, please. Mayor William Bill Edwards. Here. Mayor Pro Tem Catherine Rao.
Here.
Councilmember Carmen Lee Guns.
Here.
Councilmember Helen Z. Willis.
Here.
Councilmember Naima Gilliard.
Here.
Councilmember Rosie Jackson.
Here.
Councilmember Khalid. And Councilmember Mark Baker.
Present.
Mr. Mayor, you have a quorum.
Thank you so much, Mr. Clerk. Let the record show that Mr. Khalid has joined us. Madam City Manager, you want to first?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor and members of council. What I wanted to do today, and I will be assisted by the purchasing manager, Ms. Teresa Adams, and that is to get feedback from you on a couple of issues before we finalize the solid waste and recycling RFP that, according to our schedule, is to go out this week. And as we've been going through this process, several questions have come up. And so I just wanted to get your feedback before we finalize that particular document. And Teresa, if there's anything I missed, please chime in. One of the things that, and you will see this, and I handed to each of you a copy of this PowerPoint, deals with the providers. As we've been going through this process, and that it is new for the city, I thought it also important that we get feedback from individuals that have been in this business a little longer than we have. And so we have held meetings with the current individual for the county that manages their program. I spoke with and we met with an attorney, Ward, who had also been the attorney for solid waste for the city of Atlanta for years before he left. And we just gave them a copy of the draft RFP, and they had a lot of questions for us. The first one centers around the providers. There's two schools of thought as it relates to the provider. And the first one is that we have one provider for the entire city, but that we strongly encourage, I can't require, but strongly encourage them to use our small minority vendors as subcontractors on the project. First of all, the pros of having one contract is that it is a lot easier to manage. When you have approximately 95 plus square miles, that is a very large municipality. And with one provider that has several subs, then we could possibly cover the city in a more efficient and effective manner. Some of the areas that get to be concerns under the pros, as you see, is customer service, the quality, the tracking, the billing, and the payments. In this particular model, the service provider creates and manages the zones. The service provider also provides opportunity for our small and local businesses. The cons of that particular strategy is that relying on the service provider to provide opportunity to small businesses. And because we have not done a disparity study, we cannot establish goals. However, you have agreed to, and in our purchasing policy, we are looking at local preference, meaning within an office located within the municipality of the city of South Fulton. So that's one of the issues. The other part of this same one, as it relates to the providers, which is the next slide, deals with having multiple providers. Go back to your number one. The cons of that would be that the city would have to establish the zones. The contractors would have to say which zone they would be bidding on. And we would be selecting according to zones. Ms. Gilliard and I have had extensive questions about her district, and we know that it is different and unique compared to the more dense areas of the city and what is basically required with that. So if we were to do zones, rather than one vendor that established their own zones, then we have the other dilemma. And we really need to be able to write this RFP one way or the other. So that's the one issue, the providers. The number two issue that we would be concerning relates to the billing. If you do one provider, and even if you do multiple providers, I really do not believe the city should be involved at all in the billing. I think it needs to be the provider's responsibility to collect their money and then send us whatever is appropriate for the municipality to have. And that generally comes through our franchise fee agreement as it relates to the billing and what needs to take place with that for residential. The other one under item number 2 deals with, Mark, can you move back for me? Yes, please. So that's a major issue as it relates to, are we gonna have one provider and the provider can then do zones? Or as a municipality, are we going to divide the city up in zones? And then haulers can propose on whatever zone they want to consider. Like I said, number 2, the billing, I believe the billing should all be handled through the provider as it relates to the money that they would like, that they collect and then send us the appropriate franchise fee.
You finished?
Then there's one last slide that kind of talks about, and when you give me your feedback, if you could do it all encompassing.
You want the feedback to you while you're talking?
We can wait, when we get
We'll
through
wait
this
till
one,
we finish.
yeah, 2 more slides and we can finish. The way we wrote the RFP with a 5% franchise fee. If you'd like for that to be less, I need to know so that we can write that accordingly. It is my understanding that this will be a mandatory service throughout the municipality. And I just want a consensus on that that is what you are asking for. There's also a question about the frequency of bulk waste pickup. Is it once a month, once a quarter? What is the preference of the council as it relates to bulk pickup and the frequency? Also, when we talk about local, there is an ordinance that's being proposed by Councilwoman Willis, and as it relates to that, we've got local as well as regionally owned. I understand local. For us, regionally means within the 10-county municipal region of the Atlanta Standard Metropolitan Statistical Area. And so when I say regional, it's within the 10-county radius. As far as commercial providers, this is one of the areas where I got the most education, and I'm going to say we got the most education. And that is generally in most municipalities, you permit several commercial providers. All the publics may already have a contract with, say, for instance, and this is just an example, BFI. they may have already as an entity have a contract with Waste Industries or Waste Management. There was a recent court decision which said that if a municipality begins to mandate a particular vendor, that municipality cannot impose that vendor on the commercial entities until their current contract expires. So if someone is in a 5-year agreement with, say for instance, BFI for their commercial pickup, and we start this in the spring of next year, and they have a 5-year contract, and we go with another hauler, we cannot require them to use our hauler until that contract that they have is up. And so I wanted to make you aware of that as it relates to the whole commercial piece when it comes to providers, so that we're considering that as we're going through the process. Also in the RFP is the permitting of roll-off services. When the municipality has an event, of course, we would be expecting our major vendor to provide us with roll-off services. But when you have construction and other things that are taking place, there are different haulers that provide roll-off services. You order the bins, you pay for the bins, and they bring them out and then they haul them away. And we're recommending with roll-off services that we permit haulers, and then that way we know which ones are permitted to work within the city of South Fulton. The third one happens to be the term of the agreement. As we all know, in order to gear up for a city this large, there will be a great deal of expenditure on the part of any provider that we select, with additional trucks, just everything, and they're going to want to recoup their costs of that investment. What we have found out in our conversations is anything less than a 3-year contract does not allow them the opportunity to recoup that investment. If we go with anything less than that, we can expect that rate to be passed on to the residents. So if we do a 1-year contract, they're going to recoup all of their money within 1 year, which is going to raise their cost. And so then there's the question between a 3 or a 5-year contract with renewable options. Of course, we also have written off in here that we would recommend, and we'll see who will propose a senior rate for senior citizens that a particular hauler may want to provide. Also, we are very clear, and we've written in here specifically about the insurance requirements and what needs to be covered. And then, of course, what our proposed award process is. The last slide, and before we go to that, generally in a solicitation, the purchasing office does all of their work. They make a recommendation to the manager, and the manager makes a recommendation of a vendor to council. Of course, it's always within your decision as to whether you approve that particular vendor recommended or whether you want to go another route. I tell people all the time that 2 of the things that will destroy a manager's career very quickly is solid waste and selection of a police chief. Anybody around the country will tell you those are the 2 things. Because this is so new, and because it is our first time, as it relates to the process, everything will go, as I just mentioned. Purchasing will do what they are assigned to and will do. We are looking for outside professionals to be on that review panel, individuals that understand solid waste in order to read the proposals. However, prior to my making a recommendation to you, I am proposing that we have a public forum where the top 3, 4, or 5, whoever scores above the mean, comes and makes a presentation to you, to me, and to the public on their services. I believe it's important for everyone to hear prior to an offer being prior to a recommendation coming forth from the manager and prior to your respective vote, so that you can feel comfortable with whatever hauler you select, or if you go with the recommendation of the staff, that you're comfortable with the staff's recommendation. So that's a little different than typically would occur in procurements, but I am recommending for your consideration that we go through this process this way. Finally, as it relates to the timetable that you'll see on the last slide, we want to have this RFP out this week. We've sent legal so many versions of the RFP, I think they're tired of looking at it. And the haulers are really wanting us to get out on the street and go ahead and do what we need to do. And so we are proposing that we release the RFP. Also, as you know, a lot of times in procurements, there's pre-proposal conferences. If it were a bid, it would be a pre-bid conference where they can come and get their questions answered after they've read the RFP. They will have 20 days after the initial release of the RFP in order to provide those questions to purchasing. By the 27th day, we will answer all of those in an addendum that's posted so that everyone can see the answers to the respective questions. By the 41st date will be the deadline for the submissions of the proposals. We wanted to make sure that the proposals were not due no less than 30 days after we put the solicitation on the street. Then 72 days after the deadline, we will have the recommendation to mayor and council, and by then 117 days after the initial solicitation goes out to have a contract executed, which brings us to the early spring by the time we are actually saying when we're going to start the services. The successful vendor will have to gear up. They'll have to make sure they've got the vehicles, ordering all the bins. So there's a lot on their part, which will determine when we will actually start, but we want to have that contract executed within 117 days after we put the solicitation on the street. Did I miss anything, Teresa?
No, you didn't. You pretty much covered everything.
You sure?
Yes.
Now our
But also contract execution, depending on if we go with one contractor, that's one contract execution. But if we have multiple contracts, then that's negotiating with multiple companies. And so that number 117 would be, plus or minus some days.
Okay.
and now I would like your feedback, comments.
I saw Councilwoman Jackson first.
And maybe I'm wrong, but I thought the reasoning behind doing this, well, I know the main one because we had to choose a service, but I did think that we were attempting to do it, the city basically doing the billing, so that my idea was to capture some of, well, you have homeowners that don't do it, trash as well, but I'm saying a lot of our renters are doing excess illegal dumping. So I thought this would be an avenue, shall we say, to kind of, pass that bill on to that homeowner. And if he has a renter in that house, then he would pass that on to, but basically the way this is going right now, what I'm hearing you say, we're gonna be back to square one. So the illegal dumping is gonna continue. Does that make sense what I'm saying? Yes, it does.
Yes, ma'am, it does. It makes sense. Unfortunately, no solid waste collection program is going to do away with illegal dumping.
but what we have,
What we want to try to do is to be able to capture from the respective vendor or vendor the addresses of those residents where they're doing collection and where people have signed up with them. Because that's the only way that we can watch to see, well, I've got this list of addresses here in the city, you got this, that means all of these have not signed up for any service. When you have multifamily residents, what you have to do is first of all be able to make sure that the individual responsible for it is the landlord and not the tenants. Because then the landlord can pass that on to say, look, landlord, you get the service, not the individual tenants, because they will turn over quite frequently. However, the landlord is the one that has the service with the vendor, then you know at least there will always be the bins and the collection on that.
and that's what I'm saying. So you are saying still, it would be, say, if my neighbor next door, if that's a renter, that person, you know, that owner will be responsible for that bill. They will have a bill that's coming, that there will be a trash bin there.
And it's in the landlord's name, the owner, yes.
Gotcha. Okay, so that's not what I heard you say in the beginning, because what you were saying was by them collecting, the company, so are they able to do the same thing that the city can do?
Yes.
Okay.
In their contract, I mean, they're gonna want to be able to do, because they're gonna want their money, or either they're gonna stop picking up,
And that's what I'm saying.
as it relates to that. So it's making sure you compare the list of the respective addresses in order to make sure every household has signed up. And the key is going to be in your ordinance as to what is the penalty if they don't. And that's where the teeth is, it's in your ordinance.
Gotcha. There we go.
Finish, Councilman.
I'm through.
Councilwoman Willis.
Yes. Ms. Teresa, in conversing and working with you on an ordinance last week, we talked about the billing and the maximum way for us to capture collection and the best way to maximize. Could you share the discussion that we had?
Yes, that had to do with the tax assessor's office collecting the services, the billing, and yes, it was with the tax assessors collecting the bill and collecting for those 12 months up front, having it to go out in October with the tax bills, property tax bills, and then collecting it at a deadline.
But we
And
talked,
there's a high percentage of collection when you go back through that route.
versus this, what was we talked about the pros and the cons.
Oh, versus if, you know, the city bills or vendor bills, then if the residents do not pay, we still will not terminate services, because if they're putting trash out there on the curb, the vendor has to go ahead and empty the trash. We wouldn't want the trash bin just overflowing.
And so I asked her to be prepared to speak about both options so that the entire council could make we'll be able to make the best decision. I mean, for us, I know that we want the best collection rate, but we also want to be sensitive to residents and what they're saying. But we don't want to be left on the hook of delivering services and not being able to collect on the services that we deliver.
Councilwoman Willis, Ms. Adams and I did talk about that today in our discussion. And what we would have to be able to determine from the tax commissioner. And that is, when the municipality is providing the service, it's easy to put it on the bill, because the municipality puts it on the bill. If the municipality is not providing the service, and the service is contracted, whether we'll still be able to put it on a tax bill? And that's a question we don't have an answer to yet.
And if we do put it on the tax bill, is that an additional, contract fee that we would have to, is that an arrangement we would have to make with the, tax? Okay, gotcha.
That's the other part of that question.
Okay. Councilman Khalid?
Hey, I'm gonna follow in that vein, because, yeah, it would seem to be best, since Mr. Ferdinand does have that 99% collection rate. Is it possible to have some sort of hybrid function where we just have one person in our city hall that liaises with the tax commissioner's office to facilitate putting it on the bill? So maybe we don't run the service, but we have maybe a billing department or a billing specialist that works with Mr. Ferdinand's office.
Councilman Khalid, I'd be able to answer that better if I had the conversation with the tax commissioner. If we're going to be involved at all in the billing, of course, it's going to require staffing in order to be able to gear up in order to be able to do that. So if it is possible, then we would explore the how, which is a person being that liaison, making sure the information is there, and then getting that so that it appears on the tax bill.
And then if that's not a possibility, what sort of recourse or legal remedies would we have, or would the trash collector have, to pursue folks who just didn't pay the bill?
Okay.
No, that was a question.
Okay.
I was going to take that, Councilman. Much of that will come down to your solid waste ordinance, which is still being reviewed and drafted, so that's where the city council will be able to make a decision on how to best address that.
Do you have, could you give some examples of some things that are done in other cities, or what happens when people don't pay their bills?
I don't know offhand. I know part of one of the key cases on this involved Gwinnett County, and Gwinnett County authorized private trash collectors, and they put it on the tax bill, and it was litigated whether or not they could do that. The court determined they could, because the private collectors were effectively agents of the county government. And so given that parameter, I think that the city would have some broad leeway in how they choose to do it, but I can't tell you sitting here today what other cities other than the Gwinnett case have done. But we are looking at that, and we've been working on the solid waste ordinance for some time.
A couple more questions. Madam City Manager, you talked about the contracts with commercial vendors. We're not able to, do away with those. Do those contracts, so you gave the example of the Publix, is the contract, and maybe legal counsel can jump in, is it more often the case that those contracts are with the actual business, or is it with the owner of the building that business sits in?
I want to say probably both, depending on what their lease says as to whether the landlord provides trash service or whether the particular business provides the trash service. If it is a vendor that generates a lot of trash, I've seen where that particular company has a separate vendor, and everyone else that might be in that mall or whatever might take theirs over to the one that's provided by the landlord. But I do know places like Publix and Kroger's, they go out and they get the contracts because they can generate a lot of trash and garbage. And so it does vary depending on what else might be as a part of that or whether it's a standalone.
And then for residential customers, Is that not also the case if I have a contract with BFI or Waste Management? My contract doesn't get canceled out if I just sign one in October, or it doesn't?
Well, it depends on how your ordinance is gonna be written. Your ordinance may be written as of such and such a date, every residential property will participate in the city's program.
But there's not a set, like, state legal protection like there is for commercial.
I don't know whether it's been litigated like commercial has. And I don't know how long some of the residential contracts are, and whether they're one-year contracts or whether they do them for more than 1 year.
If I could defer answering that question until we discuss the solid waste ordinance, so I could get you a better answer, and perhaps, because I'm with the city manager, I've seen it more for counties and for commercial, but
Commercial, yeah.
I've got some thoughts on it, but this is probably not the best place for me to just start talking off the top of my head.
All right, I think this is my last question. But no, it's not. The transfer station, I have two more. At Merck Road, I hear it's a transfer station. Some people say it's not a transfer station, it's something else. What is going on with that? And are we going to ask in the RFP if the provider would be willing to take that on as well?
If directed, of course, we will put it in there. That is one decision that this council has yet to make as to whether they want to take on that transfer station.
Because right now, is it ours and Fulton County's?
It's Fulton County's.
All right, so if it's not in there, what happens? Fulton County can't keep running it in our city limits, right?
They can.
They can? I just thought there were certain things that they could do in city limits and certain things they couldn't, but they can continue to.
As long as it's still in the county, they can do it.
And do we know if they have the intentions, do they have the desire to maintain that facility?
I haven't had a confirmation, but I would believe that they would like for someone to take it off their hands.
Okay.
Yes. What he just said, the answer, he may be right. There are certain things that you can do in the city more than 10,000. So I think the answer would be that you could do it with a memorandum of understanding. I would think that would be, Josh, the appropriate. Thank you.
All right, and then the last one, grease. I would just like to ask council and you to consider, in commercial districts, they generate a lot of grease, and there's a lot of work being done around people recycling that and using it. We talk about it a lot in the food policy council that I'm on. So not necessarily demanding it, but just asking whoever the commercial vendors looking for someone who might do commercial and residential together? Are we going to keep those as two separate contracts? But whoever's doing the commercial service, I would like to see if they have any plans or any ideas around that. That's it. Thanks.
Okay, because generally that's a health department issue when it comes to grease and grease traps and how they dispose of their grease and all of that other, and so we'll see. And let me talk with you a little more about how you think a vendor, because they can't dispose of it. It's only certain vendors that can dispose of grease and empty out your grease traps, and certain places they've got to take it and all of that, and they generally are not your regular haulers. But let me do some research and then we can talk about that a little more.
Thank you.
Councilwoman Gilliard?
One thing that we need to have in order to make a decision, if we're gonna talk about inside billing, the city billing, then we really need to know how much that's gonna cost us in terms of staffing and equipment and space and all of that, okay? Versus having the company to do the billing. I think that that's gonna be really important. I don't know how much things have changed, but I know that I lived in the city of Atlanta, and they had, they provided the sanitation services, and the cost was astronomical because of the overhead. And so that's something that we definitely need to know before we make a decision in terms of going in one way or the other.
Councilwoman Willis?
Yes, I just want to remind council that I sent out the ordinance a couple of months ago, so if you can go back through your emails and look at the ordinance came from the county. And what I did, when I read through it, it did not have anything about a senior discount in it. And so when I spoke with Ms. Teresa last week, I asked her if she would do some research and include the senior discount in the ordinance and in the RFP. And at this time, I would like her to speak on the senior discount. I got a lot of feedback from the residents, the seniors, that they wanted discounted rates. They were on fixed incomes, and they did not want their rates to increase due to this process.
In researching and looking at some of the local cities in the area, I only found one city, Alpharetta, that offered a senior citizen discount. And in being able to provide numbers to the vendors in the proposal in order for them to give us a price for senior citizen, I reached out to our GIS specialist. He did some estimation of finding out exactly what residents within the city of South Fulton, how many, and I think that was approximately 3,000 was the number he gave me. And we have in the RFP for the service providers to propose a senior citizen rate. So that means the total residents, the estimated 34,000 households. I'm looking for a rate for 31,000 households, and then the other 3,000 would be the senior rate. The proposals, the fee proposals may come back the same rate, that they're not giving a senior rate, or it may be slightly less or considerably less.
So in the RFP, is there any certifications that the haulers have to have, such as like a clean, green, and that type of thing, as far as recycling, making sure that they have those particular certifications, anything like that?
That's not written it's not written into the proposal, but that doesn't mean that the companies will not provide that. We asked them for a solid waste management plan, and so their plan would specify if they provide that or if they do not.
Okay.
If they provide it, it'll be included. If they do not provide it, it will not be included.
And also too, you mentioned about the franchise fees. Will the rate vary for small haulers or for large haulers? How would the rate, is it a consistent 5% across the board, or is it vary?
Unless advised otherwise, it's a consistent 5% across the board.
Okay, Mayor Pro Tem.
I wanted to respond to something that I think Councilwoman Gilliard mentioned, and I think it's a valid concern, but I think City of Atlanta's is different in that, you know, they have the equipment and the personnel, when we would be primarily talking about a collections function, potentially depending on which way we went. And then I think one of the other things, the information we got from the GIS specialist, that looks like a snapshot in time, because I know our data shows that our senior population will continue to increase pretty significantly. And so what kind of implications that would have, that would be, I would be a little concerned with, because I know even our existing comp plan, we talked about the population soaring by 2040. So that's something that we need to really look at closely.
Councilwoman Jackson.
My only question, are you starting your seniors, the ages at 55 or 60? Where are we going?
Based on what the county is providing as far as senior citizens not having school taxes included on their bill.
Okay,
I think that age is 62 or 65, I have to verify.
Just a couple of things for myself. In the cons of establishing multiple zones and contracts, Madam City Manager, are those multiple zones bid individually, or just one contract and multiple carriers?
Multiple carriers could be it either on a zone or the entire project.
So my answer to my question is that there will be a difference in a zone if we do a multiple.
If you elect to do zones, there could be, if you've got 5 zones, you could have 5 haulers throughout your
But
city.
that can be perceived in equity.
Some zones could have more residents in them than others.
Right, okay, that was one of my concerns. Are we still looking at charging fees for vacant lots? When I say vacant lots, the undeveloped lots. Are we still contracting to get those fees also?
I'm not aware of a fee for a vacant lot under solid waste.
There was conversation that especially in terms of the bill being handled by the commissioner, tax commissioner.
That happens in Atlanta.
Right. And that there was vacant land, that they would actually charge fees for vacant properties. Yes, go ahead.
Just a quick example, I was talking with a woman in the West End, she owns the lot next to her house, and it's empty, but she gets 2 bills. She has to pay 2 sanitation bills because she owns 2 lots.
So there must be a different rate for the vacant lot compared to.
I don't know, but I do remember that conversation, and I thought that by having that conversation, that would actually help us in keeping the costs to what we're used to. The other thing was the issue of enforcement. You know, we only had several haulers in Fulton County that were actually permitted, 2 or 3. But we probably had 20 that was actually picking up trash. So I think if y'all could kind of converse and talk with yourselves as to how we deal with enforcement of unauthorized haulers.
Probably in the ordinance.
All right, those are my issues. Let me get good.
I guess based on everything I've heard, I think I'd like to see some kind of provisions that would allow, even if you're leaning towards one, incentive in the scoring for those who would use the local preference and small haulers. So even if you're leaning towards, based on this presentation, get economies of scales and efficiency, something in there that would encourage strongly via points awarded on the in the scoring for the RP. That's my way in.
Hey, Councilwoman Gunn.
City Manager, quick question. In regards to the number of haulers that are coming through our neighborhoods, at any given time, it may be 3 different services. How do you perceive how we can mitigate this? Like, how do we just have one? Are you saying that with the one service provider that we can stop all of the trucks coming through our neighborhood on Tuesday, Thursday type of thing?
That would be the desired outcome, because what a hauler would do is that they pick up in certain regions on certain days. And so if it's not the days for that particular area, you should not be seeing their trucks or anyone else's trucks that are out there hauling in that particular respect. And no matter how we do this, it's going to be incumbent on the city to have an individual appointed as the liaison with the hauler or either haulers. Generally, this function falls in your public works department, and therefore you have a staff person that does this. We're not there yet. And so there's got to be an individual, whether out of the franchise fees, I've had arrangements with other haulers where the hauler paid half of the salary and bought the vehicle for the liaison. Depends on what you do in the contract negotiations. But there is going to be the need for someone to stay on top of it, to receive whatever complaints there are, that can go back to the hauler and say, look, we're not getting good service in this area, you're leaving trash. Generally what they do is they ride the city after the route. And if there's trash left, you go call that hauler right on back and you say, look, you left a lot of trash on the streets and those sorts of things. But that's going to be necessary as we begin to move forward with this.
Councilwoman Khalid? I'm sorry.
That's fine. With the zone, so just for argument's sake, if we went with the zone system, Central Old National is one zone. Does that mean that that one zone will only have one hauler?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Correct me if I'm wrong. It is my understanding, again, as Councilman Rao was saying with economies of scale, that the larger the provider that we get, the cheaper the service is. I know I've had a survey on my website for a couple of months, and folks in my district, they want the cheapest, best service. So if that is what gets us the cheapest, best service, I think that's important. I do also wonder if there is in the points. I'm not gonna remember exactly what it's called right now, but I work with a lot of union folks, and it's my understanding that in trash, there's a lot of pressure to do a lot of houses. And that's one of the reasons that you hear trash trucks rolling early in the morning and late at night, because they have so many, their routes are overcrowded. Basically, they're overworked, but some companies are overworking their drivers. And there is when that happens, when there are accidents, or when people are working over their hours, there are fines that are associated with that. And so I would like to see this contract give points to those companies that don't do that. You know, that have fewer fines or fewer, whatever that is in other companies.
And it's going to be important in the ordinance that we establish the hours of pickup.
Yes.
Okay, that's the discussion.
Okay, so I didn't hear nothing to say stop, don't do. So I didn't hear that. I believe we can go back now, make sure we check the RFP to make sure the things that we talked about are mentioned, senior discount, use of local and small minority vendors, and those kind of things, to make sure we've got the strongest wording we can have, slight of a goal. And then we will go ahead and proceed and hope to have this out no later than the end of the week.
Don't forget enforcement and vacant lots.
Oh yes, we're gonna go just pull Atlanta's, whatever and we'll put that on in the ordinance as well. And so then that way we'll make sure it's in our number count.
Building versus non-building, one.
Right.
Again, I just want to reiterate, I don't want us just to look at a snapshot in time and we kind of put ourselves in a box on the senior issue, because I know all our projections, our population is about to soar. So I don't want to get it so that we're not getting we're not getting the collections to cover the services. So looking at that over time, please be careful.
All right, thank you, ladies.
Thank you so much.
Mr. Clerk?
The next agenda item is a resolution to adopt an amended pay and class scale for the city of South Fulton, Georgia, to approve the human resources director's use thereof and for various other purposes. This item is resolution 2017-062.
I'll entertain a motion to vote. Anybody want to give one? Let's take the discussion. Go ahead.
Mr. Mayor and members of council, this is an item that was pulled from the consent on the last agenda. We went into closed executive session and it was omitted as it relates to action, so we're bringing it back for your actions. Zena Cooper, the Director of Human Resources, is here to answer any questions that you might have.
Any questions for Ms. Cooper? If not, I'll entertain a motion.
I'd like to make a motion to adopt the amended pay and class scale for the city of South Fulton, resolution 2017-062.
Second.
Properly moved and second, any discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor? Aye. So I'm looking at 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. All right, it's unanimous. Yeah. Oh, that's 6. That's unanimous, yeah. At this time, I'd like to go into, accept the motion to go into executive session.
I'll make a motion to go into executive session for discussion on personnel and legal.
Properly moving second with discussion. All in favor, aye? Aye.
I'd like to take a motion to close executive.
I just want to make sure you're on the record. Thank you.
I'll entertain a motion to close out executive session.
I'll make a motion to close executive session.
I second.
All in favor? At this time, I'll entertain a motion to adjourn the meeting.
I'll make a motion to adjourn the meeting.
We didn't vote.
If you voted on something, you need to vote in public.
We didn't vote on anything.
Still didn't help you out.
The second.
There was no action taken for executive
Right,
session.
exactly. Do I have a second to adjourn? Second. All in favor?
Aye.
We are adjourned.